Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In this, the first part of a two-part podcast, Benita Parker from the West Wallsend District Heritage Group delves into the early, ambitious attempts to uncover coal deposits in the Shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. She explores the lives, successes and failures of the early settlers that set the stage for what was to become a booming coal industry.
Shh, listen. I wonder how long the trill of the amazing, superb lyrebird continued to entertain the forest lands in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf after the arrival of the first settlers in the 1860s. Superb lyrebirds feed on insects, spiders, worms and occasionally seeds. They find food by scratching through the leaf litter and the forest floor. The male secures his territory, clears a patch of soil, and attracts potential mates by singing and dancing on one of the several mounds within it. The cocky little fellow then throws his head back, launches into an intricate call while raising his decorative tail feathers up over his back in a show of his male prowess. Sadly, if there is no forest, there is no place for the superb lyrebird. As I worked through the preparation of this podcast, I became aware of the need to highlight some important steps along the way. Until the early 1870s, there was no coal mining activity in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. However, during the mid-1870s, there was a great interest in finding coal. There were at least 8 attempts at establishing viable mines, most of which failed. It wasn't until about 1883 that a company was formed with adequate capital and expertise to make a mine successful. 2 coal mining companies were launched almost simultaneously in 1887-88. West Wallsend Coal Company and Monkwearmouth Coal Company. The following story looks in detail at how this happened. Men came to Newcastle, New South Wales from all over the world, many of whom had come to find yellow gold during the halcyon days of the Australian gold rushes in the 1850s. But, failing to find the elusive gold, they turned their attention to coal. When the government of the day removed the monopoly to mine coal from the Australian Agricultural Company in 1847, those entrepreneurial men who could afford to form mining companies flocked into the Lower Hunter and quickly established mines, Lambton, Hamilton and Cardiff. As the fever pitch increased, mines were established at Minmi in the 1850s and Wallsend in the 1860s. The coal from all these mines was of first-class quality, and the main seam became known as the borehole seam. Wherever this rich seam flowed underground, that was where men endeavoured to reach it. These early mines lay close to Newcastle Harbour, and easy rail links were developed to get the coal from the pithead to the harbour. By the 1870s, many of the original mines in the Newcastle area had been almost worked out, and the search was on for new locations. But what was happening locally at that time in the land sometimes known as Taralba Flats in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf? From previous podcasts, we've become aware that this area was first settled in the early 1860s by men who had not made a fortune in the gold mining era or who had come to Australia at the invitation of the government to work in the rapidly expanding coal industry in the Newcastle area. By the 1870s, coal, commonly known as black gold, was the major factor attracting men into the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. Those early settlers came to this untapped country in the hope that they would find a better life for themselves and their families. Many of the men already had a coal mining background in their homeland. Everyone who came to the lower Hunter River knew there was coal in the vicinity. It literally fell out of the cliff face at Nobby's and other places along the coast. In August 1872, one of the newspapers reported, "Taralba Flat is situated some 3 or 4 miles from Wallsend, southwesterly, and here a number of free settlers have settled down on from 40 to 100 acres and upwards. They are principally miners, working occasionally in the neighbouring collieries or cultivating their little farms or orchards, many of them keeping a few cattle and supplying butter and milk to the mining townships at hand, and nearly all of them have been occupants of the ground which they hold in fee simple from 7 to 10 years. Although originally very sterile and uninviting country, they have now so improved it that a visitor will see some really comfortable homes, good gardens and farms. They are, however, subject to the annoyance of having their cattle impounded off the unfenced land of the Wallsend Coal Company, which controls large tracts of this land. The poor people are at their wits' end to know how they should proceed as to making the company fence off this land adjoining their free selections." This newspaper article serves to highlight 2 points. The first point shows that by 1872, much of the land was owned and cultivated by many small settlers. The second point is that there was already a coal company, namely Wallsend Coal Company, in possession of large tracts of land in the area. Wallsend coal was known to be of remarkably high quality, so later, when coal was found nearby, the new companies included the name in their own company. Thus, Central Wallsend, Young Wallsend and West Wallsend were all names that came into use. On land owned by William Johnson, an early settler, and his family, there was an attempt to set up a company. It failed for a couple of reasons. One was insufficient capital, but the other was a serious mistake in the documentation, which was discovered before the company could recruit enough shareholders to form a viable company. Some of these small shareholders were miners trying to buy into a new company. There is sad evidence of the failure of this company in the names of men, many of whom were miners, in the bankruptcy court during this period. Some of the earliest known families to settle in the area, later known as West Wallsend Barnsley, were Joseph Notley, Richard O'Donnell and James Lord. Others followed, including Thomas Garrett, politician, Edward Greville, politician, John Humphrey, and the Lanes, George, Mary and Mary P., all relatives of Joseph Notley, one of the earliest settlers in the area. This group selected land and formed a group known as Taralba Estate, sometimes known as the Taralba Trust. As early as March 1875, they had sought to develop a coal mine in the Taralba Parish area adjoining Newcastle New Wallsend Coal Company, with financing from England. However, the project did not go ahead for some 10 years until 1885. These people were still able to sell off their land, totalling 2,953 acres at a huge profit, to Dr. Robertson and Mr. Wallace, who then quickly passed it on to the West Wallsend Coal Company Limited, soon after the company was formed in July 1885. But let's backtrack a little. In September 1875, the Honourable Minister for Lands, Mr. Thomas Garrett, Esquire, paid a visit to Wallsend, known as one of the colliery towns. To quote from an article in the Miners Advocate and Northumberland Recorder, the object of his visit was to negotiate with the free settlers of Terralba, but now known as Barnsley, to purchase their selections for the coal company, lately organised, carrying on operations in that locality. About a dozen owners of land met Mr. Garrett at Trotter's Hotel in Wallsend, what is now the Colliery Inn Hotel. The ground taken up by the free selection is estimated at 900 acres and is within the boundary line of the Wallsend Company's property. After some conversation on the matter, I understand the free selectors agreed to accept £20 per acre. Mr. Garrett has given himself 3 months' time to answer the matter. Another article from the same paper on Wednesday, the 1st of December 1875, some 3 months later, reported, New Coal Company. We have been informed that an English company with a capital of £120,000 has purchased the estate of Mr. Thomas Garrett in the neighbourhood of Terralba. Boring operations have been commenced in 2 portions of the estate, with the view of testing the grid as quickly as possible. Attention is now directed to this part of the district, and there is no doubt that ere long it will be the scene of extensive mining operations. In February 1876, there was a further interesting report in the Miners Advocate relating to this early endeavour, under the heading of Coal at Terralba, in which it went on to say, We have been informed that the parties who have been engaged for some time past in boring for coal on Mr. Thomas Garrett's estate have struck a splendid seam of coal some 10 feet in thickness. Should the find turn out according to expectations, it will be a source of great wealth to the district, as the existence of coal there furnishes strong positive proof that the whole of the intervening country between Newcastle and Lake Macquarie is rich in coal deposits. We have been informed that boring operations have been conducted on behalf of an English company, in which case we may shortly expect to see sinking operations commenced. As we have seen, this mining endeavour never succeeded, like so many other efforts to extract coal. The name Thomas Garrett frequently appears in these early days of coal discovery and efforts to establish mines. He was, however, a man who drank heavily and took on risky land ventures. Thomas Garrett, politician, newspaper proprietor and land agent, was born on the 15th of July 1830 at Liverpool, England. He came with his family to Australia in 1840. He became a printer, first for his father and then in the government printing office, before he and his partner W.F. Carl founded the Illawarra Mercury at Wollongong in 1855. Between 1860 and 1861, with his father, they started a number of newspapers in southern New South Wales. He later turned to share broking and agency work. In 1860, he had won the Monaro seat as the acknowledged lieutenant of Sir John Robertson, of whom we will hear more in the next podcast. An active legislator and powerful debater, he was prominent but not really successful in politics. In the 1870s, he became a mining speculator and land agent. Early in 1883, he tried to form a third political party, but by July 1888, when Parkes had to ask him to resign as Secretary for Lands, he was probably an alcoholic. Sir John Robertson resigned from office in defence of his friend. In the 1880s, repeated questions in Parliament revealed that Garrett had over 68,000 acres, that's 27,519 hectares, of mineral leases on much of which he paid no rent. Closer to home for us here in the Hunter, he was also a director of Wickham and Bullock Island Coal Company Limited in Newcastle. Garrett died in Newtown in Sydney on the 25th of November 1891, leaving only a small estate. From these and other accounts written in newspapers of the times, some of these early settlers enthusiastically searched their land for evidence of coal. Those of you who listened to the story of Joseph Holmes will remember that he was one such man. He and his sons invested considerable time and money into proving that there was coal under their land by extensive private drilling, one of which was called Holmes Tunnel. Much later, this became the location of Mount Sugarloaf Colliery. There is one report of a shaft being dug to a depth of several hundred feet. But establishing a coal mine is an expensive business, and most men didn't have the necessary capital. The capital to construct mines came from other sources. In stepped the developers, politicians, real estate agents, wealthy men with family money, and even lawyers and shipping magnates. These men had knowledge of the country from their political or business connections, and they rode into this land on their fine horses, offering cash for the title to the lands of some of these poor settlers, as seen in the account already given above. Coal fever was rampant, and newspapers continued to report about New South Wales coalfields. A report from the Examiner of Coalfields on the condition and prospects of the coalfields in 1873, together with reports of the Inspector of Collieries on the state of the various coal and kerosene shale mines in New South Wales, made the following points. 1. The coal trade in New South Wales had occupied a very prosperous and satisfactory position through the year. 2. The high price of coal in England and the increased demand for it in Australia was inducing people to take up coal land in many new and promising localities. And 3. The Australian Agricultural Company, Wallsend, Lambton, Waratah, New Lambton, and cooperative mines were all working the same seam of coal, which varied from 9 to 12 feet in thickness. To quote, "It exists under the town and harbour of Newcastle, and if we take an area of 64,000 acres, bounded on the west by a line 10 miles west of Newcastle, and on the south by a line 10 miles south of Newcastle, and suppose it to average 8 feet in workable coal throughout this area, we have, at a very moderate estimate, 512 million tonnes of coal procurable from one of the seams of coal in the immediate neighbourhood of Newcastle. At a little over the present rate of working, at about 1 million tonnes per annum, this coal would last about 512 years." Such was the enthusiasm of those seeking their fortune in coal that calculations of the hidden resource were eagerly received and believed. A glimpse into the early growth of coal mining in and around Newcastle helps in the understanding of this history. Professor Edgeworth David, a leading geologist in the late 1880s, later stated that the exposures of the Newcastle coal measures in the cliff faces between Nobbies and just south of Catherine Hill Bay were probably the finest of their kind in the world. The same Newcastle coal measures, examined by the early scientists, are easily seen today in the coastal headland at Merewether, near the ocean baths. The Yard seam is visible at sea level and the Dudley seam about 10 metres above sea level. And then there was Nobby's seam, some of which is still visible today. Newcastle developed faster than the southern coalfields of New South Wales because of its better harbour facilities and available land for settlement, although the treacherous river entrance made entry difficult. Development of the Newcastle coalfield benefited by the completion of a breakwater between Nobbies and the mainland in 1846, which made the harbour entrance somewhat safer for ships, a project which had commenced in 1818. But the entrance still remained very dangerous, especially in bad weather. Apart from the weather, there were 4 major physical obstacles: Big Ben Reef, the Oyster Bank, Pirate Point, and Stony Point. It's estimated that close to 180 vessels were lost in the vicinity of the entrance to the Hunter River between 1800 and 1900. In the book Bar Safe, written by Terry Cullen, there is an excellent exposé on the dangers of Newcastle Harbour entrance. It wasn't until a breakwater was begun and built between 1861 and the 1880s on the Stockton side of the river that the entrance could be regarded as relatively safe. In these early days on mining in the Lower Hunter, moving coal from the mines to waiting ships was often a long and complicated process. The development of the rail networks made a considerable difference. The huge Australian Agricultural Company, which was created in England in 1824 to open up the land around Port Stephens, soon realised there was more money to be had extracting coal than planting crops. The company was given a monopoly by the government to find and mine coal, both for the colony and for export. By 1840, coal was being shipped from the port of Newcastle at a faster rate than it could be retrieved. A call was put out to Britain to send miners to Newcastle. There was a very positive response. In 1843, the Brown brothers, John and Alexander Brown, later known as Coal and Allied, began mining coal at 4 Mile Creek near East Maitland. These men came to Australia not as miners, but as labourers to work in a tweed factory in Stockton. But they saw potential in coal and were able to take out a lease at 4 Mile Creek. Production was so successful that they tendered to provide coal to the very active and successful Hunter River Steam Navigation Company, who accepted the tender. J&A Brown sustained their dominance of the coal industry, opening a mine at Burwood Estate near Newcastle in 1852 and acquiring the Minmi mine in 1859, which had commenced operations in 1853. In 2 years, the Minmi mine increased its production levels from 44,000 tonnes in 1860 to 111,000 tonnes in 1862 under their ownership. By far the most important direct factor affecting coal production was the opening of railway lines. It was good to know that coal lay in abundance throughout the area, but unless it could be mined and delivered to market, it was a useless product. Funding was passed by the government of the day on the 1st of December 1881 to commence railway work on the main Northern Railway line from Sydney to Hamilton. Construction started almost immediately after the bill was passed. But there were major difficulties both with the rugged terrain and the Hawkesbury River. The whole distance from Redfern to Hamilton was almost 100 miles. The work was done in two parts, south of the Hawkesbury and north of the Hawkesbury, until the Hawkesbury River Rail Bridge was constructed and opened on the 1st of May 1889. The mining companies in the Newcastle area were able to access the northern section well before the entire line was completed. This enabled them to transport their coal to the harbour for shipment around the world. This was of great importance to the mining industry as the railways allowed for the improved transportation of coal and other minerals to the wharf. The railway linking West Wallsend Coal Company mine and the main Northern Line, when it was completed in 1888, also carried passengers. While only providing a morning and evening passenger service, the trains played a significant part in the life of the community. The cock-a-doodle-doos of the approaching trains in those early days signalled special events, such as success of the local soccer team. What we have looked at here has been the background setting the scene for the expansion of the coal industry into the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf in the early 1880s. The next podcast will focus on those mines which were successfully constructed and, by yielding massive quantities of first-grade coal, brought a complete lifestyle change into the tranquil valleys in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf.
In part 2 of this podcast, which will air next month, Benita recounts the stories of the mines that did succeed and forever changed the landscape and the lives of those living in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. We look forward to you joining us again on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.